Bonjour, bon après-midi. Hello, everyone. My name is Steven Guilbeault. I'm accompanied by some of my caucus colleagues, and we want to talk about the decision today by the Alberta government to invoke the Sovereignty Act on the clean electricity regulation. First, I'd like to say that we have been working in good faith with the government of Alberta for many months now as part of a working group to explore both the clean electricity regulation as well as the oil and gas cap. And not once in the many meetings that we've had with them did they raise the Sovereignty Act motion, which jeopardized the collaboration that we've had so far. But like the province of Alberta, we agree that we need to develop a clean grid that is affordable and reliable. Of course we agree on that, because it's the foundation of a prosperous and clean future for all Canadians. The draft regulations that I introduced this summer provide a lot of flexibility for many jurisdictions across the country who still use fossil fuels, and more specifically natural gas, to continue doing so after 2035. There is no cliff, as Premier Smith has said many times, for those jurisdictions using natural gas. But it is true that we want to limit as much as possible the use of fossil fuels as part of our grid in 2035, but it's not a fossil fuel-free grid in 2035. It's a carbon-neutral grid. We want to minimize the use of fossil fuels and maximize the use of renewable energies. The Government of Canada is making historic investment to support this transition with provinces and territories. Another $40 billion in the last last budget was announced to support the development of clean electricity across the country. And recently in Alberta, 50 projects worth more than $600 million have been invested to help Albertans and the Government of Alberta achieve this. This seems to be part of a new tradition of the Alberta government to ideologically position their government on issues of clean electricity, renewable energy. They have put a moratorium, Premier Smith has put a moratorium on place, which is jeopardizing $30 billion worth of investment in the province, putting thousands of jobs at risk. And contrary to many of the claims that, well, all of the claims that the Premier is making on this, we have in fact signed agreements with provinces like Nova Scotia and New Brunswick who are still very dependent on fossil fuel to produce their electricity and who've agreed to work with us to have a carbon neutral grid by 2035. So it is possible to do so in Canada. It is possible to do so in jurisdictions that are still very dependent on fossil fuel, but it means that we have to work together, not against each other. And that's what I find unacceptable with the position that Premier Smith has taken, because it's bad for Albertans, it's bad for workers in Albertans, it's bad for the economy of Alberta. And obviously we know that as far as Pierre Poilievre is concerned, nothing would happen on this, because he doesn't even, the official position of his party is that they don't believe in climate change, let alone measures that we should put in place to fight climate change. So we will continue moving ahead with this. There is no legal basis for what Alberta is doing, and we feel that we're on very solid ground. And the fact that we already have some provinces who are on board with us, as well as a number of private companies and investors who say that this is the way to the future. We will continue working on this. Alors, je vais résumer rapidement ce que j'ai dit en anglais, en français. Donc, nous sommes ici pour parler de l'acte de souveraineté que la première ministre Smith a décidé d'invoquer aujourd'hui. Je tiens à dire d'abord que nous avons un groupe de travail sur le règlement pour le réseau électrique carboneutre en 2035 et sur le plafond des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Depuis plusieurs mois avec l'Alberta, ils n'ont jamais mentionné ça. C'est la première fois qu'on en entend parler. D'une part, c'est clairement motivé par une idéologie anti-environnement, anti-lutte au changement climatique et anti-progrès. Il faut bien comprendre que la première ministre de l'Alberta a mis en place un moratoire sur le développement des énergies renouvelables, ce qui met à risque 30 milliards d'investissements dans sa province. Des milliers d'emplois sont à risque. Et c'est complètement motivé par l'idéologie. On a d'ailleurs deux provinces, le Nouveau-Brunswick et la Nouvelle-Écosse, qui ont accepté, qui ont signé une entente avec nous pour travailler sur un réseau électrique carboneutre en 2035. Et ce sont deux provinces qui sont encore très dépendantes des combustibles fossiles pour leur production d'électricité. Alors, c'est tout à fait possible de faire ça. Et à notre avis, ce que fait l'Alberta ne repose sur aucune base légale. Alors là-dessus, je vais céder la parole à mon collègue et ami, George Chahal.
Thank you, Minister. Premier Smith's policies have brought forward fear and uncertainty amongst Albertans and Canadians. We've seen these policies result in a chilling effect on investment with the moratorium on renewables, where close to over $30 billion of investment has been lost and thousands of jobs. We've also seen, in last month, I had brought this forward, a misinformation campaign of millions of dollars of Alberta taxpayers' dollars going towards misinforming Albertans and Canadians when it comes to our clean electricity regulations. What I'm asking the Premier today, before COP28, is to, first of all, lift the moratorium so we can get investment to Alberta, the $1 billion of investment that's been put on hold or lost, back to Alberta, but also create thousands of clean energy jobs. I'm also asking the Premier to match the federal government's carbon capture, utilize and storage investment incentives that we've provided. The provincial government has waited much too long. They need to act quickly to match our federal incentives so we can get carbon capture, utilization, storage projects in the ground to make sure that we are doing our part, but also create thousands of jobs by working together. We need to focus on making sure that our province is a leader in all things energy. I hope over the upcoming days that our province reflects and decides to work together for the best interests of Albertans and Canadians. Thank you.
Minister, is Alberta's decision to invoke the Sovereignty Act going to convince you to, back off and move the targets to 2050?
No.
What do you have to say to the harsh words that the Premier had for you personally?
Well, I saw over the weekend that she called me a maverick. I've been called worse, way worse. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the call signal of Tom Cruise in Top Gun. So I can go with that, maverick.
What about the draft regulations, sir? Are you willing to open the draft regulations to find a middle ground here, or are we going back to the Supreme Court again on this one?
Well, the draft regulations are exactly that, draft regulations, because we want to have conversations with provinces, territories, Indigenous representatives, and other stakeholders. Just last week, I had meetings with a number of electricity players in Canada, Crown corporations, private utilities, to talk about those regulations. So they're not final. So we are open to making some changes. That's what the conversation should be about, not whether or not we should be doing this like Premier Smith is doing.
Just to finish off, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind, is there a way to find your way out of this adversarial classic Alberta-Ottawa fight that Premier Smith seems to relish? Is there a way to just quietly find a path forward that would benefit everyone?
I would like nothing more than that.
Alberta and Saskatchewan have a harder path on this. They don't have a clean grid today like some of the other provinces like Ontario, Quebec, or BC. Are you open to giving them more leeway to get to a net zero grid, recognizing that they don't have hydro or nuclear resources today?
Well, I would argue that Nova Scotia and New Brunswick also have a very difficult path forward when it comes to achieving carbon neutrality for the electricity grid by 2035, and yet they're sitting at the table with us trying to figure out how we do this. And that's what they should be doing, as opposed to fighting us with this Sovereignty Act, which will it will lead to nothing. It doesn't help Albertans in any way. It doesn't help Canadians in any way. The purpose of presenting draft regulations is that so we can have conversations. We try to, when we put this out there, we think it's the best possible middle ground that we found by listening to hundreds of stakeholders across the country before we tabled those draft regulations. It's possible we didn't get it right, and we're certainly happy to have conversation with people in terms of what could be better regulations moving into final regulations, if only Alberta and Saskatchewan were willing to have those conversations with us.
A bunch of civil servants, regulators, everyone else in Alberta was basically ordered today by this motion not to cooperate with you. Are you concerned? What is your message to those regulators, to those civil servants?
Well, we're happy to talk to anyone who'll talk to us to make those regulations the best possible regulations.
contester cette utilisation-là de la loi sur la souveraineté devant les tribunaux? Est-ce qu'il y a une possibilité de le faire?
Ben non, parce que ça n'a aucun fondement juridique. C'est une résolution qui a été adoptée dans l'Assemblée législative. Ça n'a aucun fondement juridique. Alors, je n'ai pas besoin de contester ça. Nous, on continue d'avancer avec la réglementation sur le réseau électrique carboneutre. Je vais peut-être lui donner une sous-question, si vous en avez une.
Oui, Daniel Smith vous accuse d'empiéter encore une fois là, sur les compétences des provinces, notamment en ce qui a trait en matière d'électricité. Qu'est-ce que vous avez à dire face à cette accusation-là?
La Cour suprême, sur la décision concernant la tarification carbone, a été très claire. Le gouvernement fédéral peut agir sur la question des changements climatiques, notamment sur la pollution qui cause les changements climatiques. C'est exactement ce que nous faisons. Le règlement sur le réseau électrique carboneutre ne s'attaque pas à... On ne dit pas vous devez utiliser tel type d'énergie ou tel type d'énergie. Tout ce qu'on dit, c'est que vous devez réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre du réseau électrique d'ici 2035. Il faut que le réseau électrique soit carboneutre. Il y a beaucoup de mécanismes de flexibilité là-dedans pour que les provinces puissent y arriver. Yes.
Are you concerned that this could derail your government from meeting its climate goals?
No, because we'll continue moving ahead with the regulations.
You said a moment ago, I believe, that you wouldn't challenge the use of this motion in the Supreme Court. You don't see it as a venue for that. But what,
because it has no legal basis.
what if Alberta regulators and Alberta continues on this road and doesn't align with the clean electricity regulations going forward, in 2035?
Companies, utilities, whether they're private or public, will be forced under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to meet those objectives in 2035. We're giving 13 years, 12 years now, I suppose, to companies to get ready for this. Like, we're giving them more than a decade to prepare for this. There's no basis for any of the claims that Premier Smith has made about the impact it would have on rates in Alberta, the impact it would have on reliability. Absolutely nothing she said has been supported by any evidence, any shred of evidence. We have put hundreds of pages of documentation to the public to be studied, to be debated. She's done none of this.
You talked about the giving 12 years, but a nuclear facility, a hydroelectric dam, the kind of things that underline green power in other provinces of the country often take much longer than 12 years to go from design to implementation. Are you concerned that there isn't enough time to bring on green baseload power in Alberta?
What I would say is that, first, Alberta would still be able to use the natural gas facilities that they have now. There are flexibility mechanisms under the draft regulations to do that. So this idea that there's a cliff come January 1st, 2035 is simply not true. Like, it's simply not true. And in terms of the development of new projects, I mean, we're seeing Ontario Power Generation will have a small modular nuclear reactor online in 2027, I believe, could be 2028. We are working to see how we can be more efficient in terms of our permitting and impact assessment process to fast-track projects that are required to achieve our climate change goals, to achieve our carbon neutrality goals. And we will happily work with provinces and territories and project promoters to ensure that projects are assessed in a good way, that we ensure that Indigenous nations are consulted, local communities are consulted, environmental impact are properly assessed, but in an efficient way so that we can achieve those goals. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Oui, c'était quoi la question encore?
What was your question?
About whether or not Alberta has enough
D'accord,
time to
oui,
bring on...
oui, parfait, merci. En fait, la question, est-ce qu'il y a suffisamment de temps d'ici 2035? Je pense que oui. C'est pourquoi on a donné plus d'une décennie aux provinces, aux territoires, aux compagnies d'électricité, qu'elles soient publiques ou privées, pour se préparer à ça, parce que nous croyons que ces projets les projets qui sont nécessaires peuvent être développés, que ce soit des projets hydroélectriques, des projets éoliens, des projets solaires. Certaines provinces veulent explorer le nucléaire. C'est tout à fait possible dans le cadre de ces règlements-là. La compagnie d'électricité en Ontario, Ontario Power Generation, aura un petit réacteur modulaire en ligne d'ici 2027 ou 2028. Et d'autres sont prévus ailleurs au pays. Alors, la réglementation est très agnostique sur le type d'électricité, en autant que ce soit une forme de production d'électricité qui n'émet pas de gaz à effet de serre. Merci. Thank you so much.